Hi again, everybody. It's lovely to see so many familiar faces here. Thank you for coming back. The next 2 nights I hope you find interesting, both myself and Mike. I was just talking to Mike today and this evening about what we're both going to talk about, and as Mike said, the overlap is incredible, even though on the surface it may not seem that way. But ultimately what we're talking about here is self-responsibility. Self-responsibility for every action of your life, I think, is very important, and one that's becoming very, as I travel more and I meet more people around the place and I talk to more people seem to have a desire to decouple themselves from their conditioning, although they may not sort of consciously know it on the surface. In the background they very much know that there's a different way of doing things and a different way of looking at life, and I think the internet has played a huge part in that, because it's given people all over the world a way of looking at the world from a vantage point that wasn't necessarily a product of mainstream media, newspapers, TV, etc., or movies. And in some ways we're sort of becoming de-Americanized in a lot of ways, because more people are not sort of being controlled by Hollywood. I know that's basically what controls the media around the world in terms of everything, as they are the dominant power. And my last book, The Amble of the Psyche, I spoke about this, about how to actually build a firewall around your consciousness. So when you absorb influence from the media, you absorb that influence in a healthy way, that you don't reject everything, you don't push everything away. What you do is you develop a good relationship with it. And ultimately, both my previous work into psychopathology and our relationship with each other and society, and particularly the control structure at the top, it became very apparent to me that we are in a dysfunctional relationship with the world. And it's not our fault. It's not our fault. This is how we've been conditioned, and this is how we've been, I wouldn't say manipulated, but I think that would probably be not too far off. Basically guided towards, through everything from education, our social, behavioural modification through cultures and so on. And it's an important topic, because what it ultimately means is unlearning everything you already know. Doesn't mean that you throw away everything you already know. It doesn't mean that everything you already know is bad. It just means that you have to say, why do I feel this way about that? Why do I have this relationship to my government? Why do I have this relationship to my partner? Why do I have this relationship to the world around me? Why do I have this relationship to myself? And how natural is it? Was it a product of something that I deliberately worked on improving and making for myself, or was I fulfilling a mandate, a framework, a constitution, a statute, or just a social understanding? And this is a very big thing in my life as I get to this age and I look around me. And this talk tonight on love came kind of by accident. I did this talk before, impromptu, in Glastonbury, England last summer. And I didn't have any slides about it, and somebody just says to me, can you just do a quick talk about this, love? And I said, what would I know about that? And they said, well, you've done so much work into relationships and people who are affected by toxic individuals who've come into their lives. What brought them there was love. And I says, yeah, that's absolutely true. So then this became like two poles of a magnet. The early part of my work was dealing with these pathological individuals who come into our lives, corporations, governments, whatever, and they prey upon our human decency. Well, that's one pole of a magnet, right? That's the negative pole of the magnet. Well, that wouldn't exist without a symbiotic relationship with the positive pole of the magnet. The positive pole of the magnet would be human decency, okay? And that would be things like love. We would love these people who manipulate us because they fulfilled desires and needs in us that they spotted right away. When a corporation sells you a product through advertising, they've often built into you an engineered need for that product. They make you want something before they actually deliver it to you. This is very pathological, okay? So love today is what this talk tonight is about. And it's about what is love, how does it work, is it all good, is it all bad, and what does the word ultimately mean? Because I started to think about the term love, L-O-V-E, right? It has been objectified. It doesn't mean anything, really. It's the most, for a word that doesn't mean anything specific to one thing, it's very abstract. It's the most common word probably that we hear all the time. Every song seems to have love in it. It's an ongoing theme in just about every movie at some point. The love story inside the movie, the love song. And in the Western society, love, the term love, has overtaken God. We use the term love now as much as God for, say, previous generations. And this is something that's so deep and so ingrained into our society that yet we don't really know what it is. And that's what this talk I did that night. And I had some people there, and some people were looking at me like, what were you on about? Others were like, wow, you just made me think that's really true. We had a discussion afterwards about it, and we had a dialogue. And from this dialogue, we kind of came up with this idea of what this show is tonight. So tonight I'm hoping to demystify what love is. That's very good. Evolution, L-O-V-E spelled backwards. Yeah, and that's what we're going to do tonight.
Rome and amour.
Yeah, that's well, romance, yeah.
Yeah. But in Norwegian it has a meaning.
Well, it has a meaning in English too,
Okay.
but it has a whole plethora, a whole constellation of meanings. And that's what we're going to talk about tonight. And ultimately, is there one specific meaning? Because everybody talks about wanting love. But love is a different thing.
But the word is kjærlighet
Yeah.
in Norwegian. And kjærlig means that you or het. So if you take the Norwegian words and split it up, it actually means that it's someone that you care for. The direct understanding of the Norwegian words, which is completely different than love. Sorry.
No, I'm glad you told me
The Norwegian
that.
language is not as corrupted as the English
Yeah,
language.
because it's back to the
I'm glad you pointed that out, because I was a little worried about this. So that's why I'm going to be talking in terms of universal language, in terms of media, Hollywood, love songs, romance, and other concepts associated with that. So thank you for pointing that out, because I was a bit worried, because English is a horrifically bad language. It does not have the same depth towards the individual and towards the emotion that many other languages have. Because remember, ultimately English is a business language. That's the English that we have today was ultimately a mercantile trading business language developed in the Elizabethan times. So yes, when I talk about love, I'm talking in the sort of general pop culture terms. But ultimately it's the same spell all over the world that they're trying to put upon us. Now, so as this progresses, you'll get a better understanding of what I really mean by it, okay? Now, I think in English language it's the most misunderstood term possible, because you could ask yourself, well, is there one absolute example of love? I love my boyfriend, right? But that's not the same love you would have for your children, okay? But the term is still the same, love. I love chocolate. People throw the word around so much. I love that song, that movie. You show me a word in English that's used for so many things. And there's a real reason for this, because they know it works. They know it works. So, I love my boyfriend. Okay, I have romantic love for my boyfriend. I want to marry him. I want to, my girlfriend, whatever. Not my boyfriend, I'm my man. But I want to have a girlfriend. I want to have, a relationship on a deep level that's with someone that lasts forever. You understand? That's the kind of romantic ideal that's been put into our head. You're going to find out how screwed up the English world is tonight. I'm going to tell you that. That's what really this is about. Because it makes me understand, going through this, how programmed we are, you know. And I love my children. Well, obviously, you wouldn't have the same emotional affection for your husband or your wife as you would for your children, because the needs and requirements are kind of different. It's a different thing. The same with I love my pets. The same kind of idea. That's not the same. And I love chocolate. Well, then that turns it into an object. You know, and this is a big problem today, particularly in English-speaking countries, where people associate an object with a person or an emotion or a feeling. So they really would love chocolate as much as their boyfriend. And I love that song or that movie. Throwing it out there. I love that song and I love that movie. But love, 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 and love. And yet, they're completely four different terms. Four different ways of looking at the world. But yet they use the same word in the English language for all four. Something's going on here. Something's not right with this. Even if English and it is a stupid language, even if it is, this is deliberately done for a reason, because they're trying to use one term, love, like they used God in the past, to control us. I'm not saying any of these things aren't real, that people don't love their boyfriends or girlfriends or husbands or wives. I'm not saying that people don't love their children, vice versa, or their pets, the chocolate or the film, but they're not the same thing. But the system, because the system is about homogenization and standardization, it wants love to encompass these things, because they understand the power of that word, the way they understood and used and manipulated us with terms like God in the past, or country, nation, their spells. Alan Moore, the famous English comic book writer, he's also a magician, and he talks about how the term to spell a word, S-P-E-L-L, is exactly the same thing as a magical spell. It's the same thing, because the word has an effect upon your consciousness, upon your mind, that literally alters your consciousness. Likewise, grammar, in English the term grammar, comes from the French a grimoire, which is also a magical spell. We live in a world of magical spells, but they're not like Harry Potter. They're not like, a stage magician. That's not what magic is. What magic is altering consciousness of another person or a group of people according to what you want them to do. So, for instance, I've created an act of magic here tonight. Well, actually, Siv has, but the same thing. This event didn't exist. It now exists, and that's an act of magic, because all magic is taking an idea in the mind and bringing it into reality in the material world. So, for instance, if I wanted to build a chair, I draw a plan, I create the chair from wood, I nail it together, screw it together and cut it, and I build a chair. That's an act of magic in the purest sense, because I've taken something that was just an idea inside my consciousness and brought it into reality in the material universe. This is what you're going to learn from both their presentations tonight and tomorrow. Funny enough, but it makes you think, that ultimately how your consciousness is directed will actually determine the outcome and the course of your existence as a human being, and what life will hold ahead of you. Because if you can change the terms of reference up here, if you can change your relationship with a word up here, or a concept up here, it affects you completely differently in so many ways. And love is one of them. And this is what they don't teach us in school, that there's a spell that's put upon us by things like love and romance. There's a spell put upon us by things like patriotism and God, believing in God and all this stuff. This is why we have religious fanaticism and things like that. These are spells. Now, love can represent an emotion. You fall in love, you have a chemical release, okay? Sometimes it's real, but it's also a trick in the brain. You have hormones and neurotransmitters. We're going to talk a little bit about that later, that cause you to have this sensation. This is an evolutionary process that wants us, and it's not. at one level, this is the thing, at one level it's an evolutionary process. On another level it's something very deep and spiritual if you want to go that direction. But ultimately it's both working together, because the manifestation of what happens in the non-material world always expresses itself in the material world. So two people love each other and have a baby, there's a classic example of it. That's how it works. But the two things are together. So that's the emotion. It can represent warm, happy feelings, such as the birth of a child. But it can also have feelings of appreciation. You appreciate someone's work, their art, their creativity, their goodness as a human being. You could have that feeling towards it as well. Or even watching the sunrise, the same chemicals are triggered as when you fall in love, as when you eat chocolate. People don't know that. A happy gesture from a dog, or even anything that touches one on a deep emotion, something so deep that goes in there. But it's not only romance that triggers that, or falling in love. That can happen in lots of ways. And that's why somehow, and we're going to talk about this in history, the idea of romance was coupled onto the idea of love as being the same thing. But they're not. They're really not. And what happened was, they discovered very early on in commercial history, when we talk about business, that if you can make somebody love a product, they'll buy that product. And that was a big idea, that they would actually trigger the same emotions and the same feelings in you for a product. This is what they want to do. I'm not saying this happens. It does happen to some people, believe it or not. Or a celebrity, God help us in this day. I don't know how it is in Norway, but like celebrity obsession has gone haywire in the English-speaking world, where celebrities have become the new gods because people love them. They genuinely love them. But it's ultimately about corporations collecting money and business, just business. And this is they understood and learned very early on that there was a commercial and a political mandate in this. You could control people. Now, you've all heard of William Shakespeare, I'm sure, right? Hamlet, Romeo and Juliet, right? Well, we don't know who Shakespeare was. There was a guy called William Shakespeare that existed in Stratford-on-Avon. But it's quite possible that he did not write any of those books, any of those plays, from Julius Caesar to Othello. It's very likely that that was a collection of sort of social engineers within the Elizabethan court who were modifying the behaviour of the English population and then later the world population in order to streamline trade across borders. So a classic example would be something like Othello. They knew that the British establishment, Britain was going to become a great empire of ships and sailing and commerce. They had to make a situation where they were not afraid of foreigners. They were not afraid of people and other cultures. So they created a media through this guy called Shakespeare, where foreigners were just like us. Hamlet, he had a bad time. His stepfather was no good. He loved his girlfriend. It all went very bad. But ultimately, he was a good guy just like us. He wasn't English. He was Danish. Julius Caesar was a good guy. Brutus was a bad guy. They're just like the good guys and bad guys they had in England. But they were Roman. They were not English. And so forth and so on. To demystify the foreigner was a big part of actually putting English ships, trading ships in the East India Company and the Dutch East India Company, and sending them out to the world, because they'd have to go and face people not as enemies, but as just another different version of themselves. And the British were English particularly. I mean, when I say British, it wasn't Britain at that time, it was England. They were very, very good at understanding how to control people and make them have expectations of foreigners. And likewise, the earliest versions of propaganda came from this as well. If they wanted to demonize a culture, they would write a satire, a play, a story where they were the enemies. They were the enemies. And then people would say, oh, I don't know the Turks because I saw a play last night and all the Turks were all thieves and cutthroats. That's a spell. That's a spell played on your mind. But also, the first spell of love came from Hamlet, came from Shakespeare at that time too. Romeo and Juliet was a spell that was put out there to show that love sucks, that love is a bad idea because it causes trouble. Because you remember the story of the two kids, that was the story behind Romeo and Juliet, the play? Boy and a girl, two different families in Verona, arriving Italian merchant families, or one falls in love with the other, and it's doomed, and they both die. So that was a way of saying that, you know, love can bring down a business. Love can bring down an empire. And people would say, oh, it's such a beautiful story of love. But it's not really. It's two young people that dying and losing their lives, you know. And then they would and it's not romantic. It's terrible. And
but it is also a story about two young people that were congruent, emotionally honest, amidst the difficulties.
Yes, but that was what they were saying to people. Don't do that, because if you do that, you'll die. Clever. Well, that's true. They loved each other. They came together for the right reason. They transcended the political stage. But ultimately go, look what happens. You're dead. And that sticks into your subconsciousness. That stays up there. Then that's where the idea of tragic love came from. The tragic love story came from that. Romeo and Juliet. And it might seem so, and it's been updated through the years. West Side Story, the Hollywood musical, was based on that, and a few other things. They just had street gangs in New York instead of Italian rival families, but it was the same idea. There were two ethnic groups. I think one was like Irish Americans, and ones were like Latinos. Don't mix. Stick with your own kind, because love just causes trouble. Now, when I was thinking about this too, I was thinking about my older generations, my grandparents and stuff. They never expressed romantic love that I'm aware of. And I don't think they ever did. But yet they came from a generation where they were together for 70 years or something incredible, 60 years. And they had raised children and grandchildren, and everyone turned out okay. Now, how did that happen? If they did that without romance, you know. And then we have a situation today where we're saying, don't you dare marry him unless he's perfect. He's just right for you. But they weren't right for each other. They were fighting. They used to have arguments all the time. But they still loved each other on a very deep level, below the object. They knew at some very instinctual level down here that they were meant to be together. And they were meant to build this project of a family together. And that's been taken away from us in the modern times. I can remember, like there's a pop song I remember back in the 80s, I think in a band, but the lyrics of the song was perfect. And the girl was singing about, if a man isn't perfect, I'm not interested. Like, if he's not perfect, I don't want him. Well, guess what? He doesn't exist. So you're never going to find anyone. But they put that into people's heads. That he has, or she has to be perfect. I want the perfect woman. You know, there's a spaceship flight to Mars. It's not going to happen. I want the perfect man. Really, we'll get used to a life of being alone because it's not going to happen. So this element of perfection has been put in there. Very dangerous stuff. Very, very not healthy. Not healthy at all. Yeah, but who do they target with this stuff? The younger people, the teenagers. Now, I'm not saying there isn't young people who have real, genuine love for each other. I know people and friends who met at quite young ages in their teens and had wonderful marriages and all the way through their lives. It happens. It does happen. But that's pointed at people at a very, very young age, you know, and at a time when their hormones are flying in their bodies. And it's to corrupt them. It's to corrupt them about the idea of love. So it creates superficiality, a childishness. And so many people, I don't know how it is in Norway, I can't speak for you guys, but I can tell in the English-speaking world, particularly in the United States, it's been reduced to a childlike level that goes on forever. Where everyone has to be, like, there's people in their 60s and 70s who want that romance they had when they were teenagers. You know what I'm saying? That's what they're like, because they have not really learned anything from their experiences of life. And they're just being dictated to by the cinema, by the movies, by the TV, and by these awful love songs. I mean, if people had any idea, love songs have done so much damage to human beings because they just put out these when you have like these boy bands, these 17-year-old singers singing, "I'm gonna love her for the rest of my life." A 17-year-old, you know, it's ridiculous, it's stupid, but yeah, it puts the word again, the spell, into people's heads that that's how it should be, and they'd never. Have you ever heard the best relationships I've ever known, and the ones that have lasted the longest, say a married couple, are usually the ones that have had the most problems, because they've got through all those problems. And they've grown on a very deep, strong level inside. Have you ever heard a love song about that? Never. Have you ever heard a romance story about that? Never. Never. It's always forever. Well, life isn't like that. And this is what they put into our heads. But they also create a dependency, an addiction, that in many people, that you must find this perfect romance. You must find this perfect man. You must find this perfect woman. Okay? That becomes an addiction. And that addiction can be very dangerous, because what happens is you're going to see human beings then not as a person of depth, of character, of spiritual, whatever, decency inside. You're going to see them as an object. And that's what's happened to the term love. It's become an object. Like you were saying to me, Mike, become a noun. Becomes an object, a thing. It's a thing. But it's not a thing. It's something much deeper than that.